Do I even need to introduce what Dark Souls is? Even those who have never touched a single game From Software has made know about Dark Souls. A brief summary could describe the game as an action-adventure RPG that is incredibly difficult, with a rich lore found through item descriptions and very vague NPC dialogue. Oh yeah, and it won Ultimate Game of All Time award, has been cited as one of the best games ever made. You know, just a few small achievements.
Dark Souls is also a game I never thought I'd do a video about. I made my first impressions video a long time ago, and after trying the first and third game, along with Elden Ring, I swore off the games entirely, declaring them as not my kind of game. However, I always still had a fascination with the world and characters that exist within it. The thing that stopped me from playing any of these games further was the sheer difficulty that these games are known for. For me, it wasn't actually the enemies or the levels that caused my frustration, but rather the absolute enormity of punishment for mistakes by way of the amount of damage I would take from even the most basic of foes.
I never even made it past the Undead Parish on my first go around with this game, and a second go afterwards.
That was until I found a mod that turns these numbers down.
Dark Souls is very different to games I've discussed before. It's considered a mark of honour to have beaten it, and is an achievement that some people take incredibly seriously. This has led to some unfortunate community interactions with newcomers who have a negative experience with the game and are told to get good, which is frustrating to no end. This elitism held by some is ridiculous and not helpful in the slightest. It's the reason I stayed away from the games for such a long time, because I assumed that I would never be able to get good, and that's exactly what happened. But I'm not worried about it now after seeing how much help the game offers at its base difficulty to players, and the fact that no one apart from those online actually cares about how you beat Dark Souls. All that matters is your own experience with the game, and mine just so happens to be a bit easier. Doesn't take away from anyone else's experience or pride that they feel in beating it. I just wanted to play a video game.
I know there is an argument to be made that I did not experience this game the way that the developers intended. The intended experience is to endure extreme punishment in order to make the eventual victories all the sweeter. And I can imagine that the flattening of those peaks and valleys for some people is a major part of why I may get hate for deciding to have a more casual experience. But for me, the numbers were too high to surmount, but I still wanted to see what Dark Souls could offer me. So I chose to turn those numbers down to better suit my ability. It's not perfect because of the 3 levels of difficulty this mod had. I wasn't overly happy with any of them, but the one I settled on removed the majority of the damage I take, which would allow me to wait my way through Lordran. But with that out of the way, let's begin.
The first thing we see after starting a new game is the character creation screen, where we choose our gender, starting class and gift, along with customizing our character. I went with a male pyromancer gifted with the master key. The next thing we see is a cutscene which establishes all the major players and the world of Lordran, which we will be exploring throughout our quest. Shows us how the current Age of Fire came to be and that it's coming to an end. It's our job to defeat the Lords of the World and choose whether or not to relink the flame to keep the Age of Fire going, or to let it end. Our first stop on this quest is the Undead Asylum, where our character has been locked up for being one of the chosen undead, but we are given a key to get out by a knight called Oscar. This whole area acts as our tutorial, and what a fantastic one it is. It slowly teaches the player all the mechanics they'll need for the rest of the game, at first against enemies that can't fight back, before introducing them later on. It is also a great encounter with the first boss of the game, the Asylum demon. You actually encounter him twice, at first without a viable weapon, any healing, or much experience of combat at all, before coming back after obtaining all those things to achieve your first victory of the many you will obtain throughout the game. We get our healing from Oscar, who sadly perishes here in the Asylum, but not before he gives us our first objective, to ring the 2 bells of awakening. You can also see another boss as early as the first corridor, but we'll return to him later on. We are dropped off in Firelink Shrine, which will be our hub for the rest of our time in Lordran. There are a few characters in Firelink Shrine we can talk to, and one of them will tell us our objective again, in case you skipped Oscar's dialogue, but he also tells us where the 2 bells are. One above, in the church in the Undead Parish, and another far below in the depths of Blighttown.
Firelink is a great calming place in this extremely hostile world. It links into so many other areas that it would be difficult to list them all. There's a secret lift to the Undead Parish, an entrance to the catacombs, you can ride a lift far below to get to New Londo or Blighttown, or you can head up into the first area, the Undead Burg.
The Undead Burg is a good starter area that sets up a lot of the tricks that the game will continue to use throughout. It gives you many varieties of enemies and a decent amount of combinations. It introduces bigger and bigger enemies as it goes on, shows off the level design and how it will twist and turn into itself. One of the best versions of this being when the level loops back on itself to reach the area's bonfire. This was always the hurdle for me previously, but eventually I made it to the Undead Parish, which is both a different and not different area. It has its own name card that shows up as if it's a new area, but is merely an extension of the Burg, so I feel like maybe it should have just been named as such. The area is not huge, but does lead to a later area, Sen's Fortress, and has a lift that loops back to Firelink Shrine, making the Burg now pointless to trek through. We make our way up the parish before reaching its roof and fighting our first proper boss fight. The Bell Gargoyles are an interesting change to combat and a test of your management skills. You start off by fighting one gargoyle, which isn't too much to tackle, but another one shows up halfway through. However, it has half a health bar. You now have to manage the two, which is more of a test, but we eventually beat them and ring our first Bell of Awakening.
It's at this point that I did not know where the fuck I was meant to go next. I knew through cultural references that I had to head down through Blighttown, but I had no clue how to get there. I eventually figured out I had to go through the lower Undead Burg, which is our next area.
The lower Undead Burg is a fair bit more difficult than the area before. The enemies inflict a status effect which makes you lose a massive amount of health in one go. Those same enemies are a little harder as they attack faster and can parry you a lot easier. After fighting far too many enemies and being ambushed a bunch, we get to one of the most well-known moments in all of Dark Souls. The Capra Demon fight. The Capra Demon is a bastard, but not because of his attacks. Now, the attacks do hit hard, but the main thing that makes this fight hard is the arena. The Capra Demon's pretty big, with wide swings, but you fight him in what is the equivalent of a cupboard. I eventually dealt with him and got the key to the depths. The entrance to the depths leads back to Firelink Shrine, allowing you to head there and level up before you tackle your next objective.
The depths are a sewer level, which comes with all the usual trappings of a sewer level in games. This is, however, where we meet the most annoying enemy in the game, the Basilisk.
These fuckers can curse you, which is a status effect that cuts your health in half. This entails going on an entire fucking side quest in order to cure it, before you can really continue what's happening. The depths suffer from a lack of visual distinction between areas, as most of it all looks the same, and it has a lot of similar enemies throughout to what I've explained so far. I'll cut straight to the boss. The introduction is one of the best in the game. A tiny head pokes above the edge of the arena. It doesn't look too threatening, but very quickly it brings the rest of its body up and shows its true scale. The Gaping Dragon is yet another testing boss fight. Now you have to fight something far bigger than anything you've fought thus far. The strat for this enemy is to move around to its back, since that's where it cannot reach you easily. After beating it, we receive the Blighttown key and make our way there. But first, I want to talk about the first side area. It is possible at any point after you unlock the lift from the Undead Parish to Firelink Shrine to make your way back to the Undead Asylum. This allows you to fight another version of the Asylum demon called the Stray Demon. It doesn't have new moves and is basically just a slightly harder version of that original fight. You can also fight Oscar, who has gone hollow here, and acquire an item used later on called the Peculiar Doll. This is fine for a revisit, but I don't think that the fight with the Stray Demon is that interesting, since it's more or less a copy and paste of the Asylum demon from earlier on. Let's move on to the next part of our quest. This chapter is titled correctly. I know the next area in the sequence is Blighttown, but I genuinely felt no reason to head there or return to the game at all. After having such a draw to the world of Lordran and experiencing about a quarter of the game's story, I found myself not actually having much fun. This really set in for me as I reached the beginning of Blighttown and just feeling like I was slogging through the game for the sake of this video, and not because I was actually enjoying the gameplay of Dark Souls. I can now firmly say that these games are not for me, but it's not for the same reason I have stated previously. I previously said that I didn't like the overwhelming difficulty and I still don't, but I now also know that the gameplay itself is what turns me away from this series. The combat is tedious, as a lot of enemies require such similar approaches, but the boss fights are far more interesting. I think this is a game that I will forever just enjoy the world of and watch videos about, rather than playing for myself.
I hope you all enjoyed this review about Dark Souls, and I hope I don't have too many fanboys trying to convince me that I should like this game. Just accept that you most likely won't change my opinion, and I won't be able to change yours. This game just isn't for me. I've been Roscoe M, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.